This is the Amidon Planet podcast, where we are learning in order to be better and teach better. I am Joel Amidon, and welcome to the show. What we do here on the Amidon Planet podcast is pretty simple. We just pull out ideas from books, interviews, other podcasts, basically any content that is out there, and consider how to apply those ideas to being better and teaching better. Ultimately, the goal is to lead people to love others through learning and teaching. In this episode of the podcast, we are going to answer a quick question, then dive into a conversation about our featured book, The Power of Moments, Why Certain Experiences Have Extraordinary Impact, written by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And again, I am joined by Dr. Gary Williams. So we had lots of positive reactions out there to the last episode with Gary and I am just glad that he's willing to come back and share his perspective on this book. And so before we do that, though, I did have a question come to me from my friend Nick, who asked, and I am paraphrasing a bit, why Amidon Planet? Where did that name come from? So thanks for asking, Nick. Appreciate it. The answer has a bit of a weird history, so bear with me for a sec. So during my master's degree program, I had a technology integration course where I created this naturalist type video that was in the spirit of the crocodile hunter. So that was a show that was pretty popular at the time with Steve Irwin. He would go out into the wild basically and find different animals and stuff. So in the video that I created, I, in quotations, discovered different types of math group members in their natural habitat. The intent of the video was to explicitly teach how I wanted my high school students to act within their groups during our mathematical investigations. And to keep the spirit of the video's content, I created this image that would lead into the video that was the old Animal Planet logo. So it had like the silhouette of like an elephant and maybe a bird or something, along with Animal Planet, all in green. And basically I superimposed Amidon over animal and tried to match the green somewhat closely, but didn't do a very good job. Anyway, more on that in a bit. So it said Amidon Planet rather than Animal Planet. So I used that image to lead into the video, but then I had that image and I started putting it as the lead slide in my PowerPoints to make me feel like a cool dude. And yeah, if you hear stuff in the background, I'm sitting by a pool. It's Memorial Day weekend, and hopefully wherever you're at, you're enjoying some good weather too with some family and friends like I am. So anyway, back to the story. So I have this image of Amidon Planet, and I put it in the front of PowerPoints, and I kept doing that until I took a course in my doctoral program called something like The Psychology of Communicating Visually, or something like that, with Dr. David Williamson Schaefer. But the real or informal or real title of the course was How to Make PowerPoints That Don't Suck, and that was the gist of it. So now, David Williamson Schaefer was never shy about sharing his opinion in this course. Like that was he kind of trial by fire sort of things, where when you put stuff up, he would tell you about, he would not tell you, he'd ask you a bunch of questions to kind of get you to think a little bit better about it. And so when I put up my first assignment and it had that Amidon Planet image up on the screen that went into it, that led it, so it wasn't even into the actual assignment part, he almost flew out of his seat saying, "What is that?" And so I had some pretty weak answers for why I put it there, but it essentially came down to the fact that I thought it was cool. I mean, it was cute, it was cool, whatever you want to say. There wasn't a lot behind that. But he kept asking me questions about it. He's like, well, why is it pixelated? Well, why don't those greens match? Like, what's the elephant for? Are you trying to say something with the elephant? Like, all these sorts of things behind the image, and I didn't have anything to answer. His questions led me to the conclusion that the image had no purpose. That Amidon Planet meant nothing. And if it means nothing, why was I then putting it in front of the eyes of my audience, who I was supposed to honor in my talk, right? Not confuse them. I was making them spend calories trying to figure out the meaning of something that had no meaning. His big argument for the entire course, not just for this one interaction, is that you need to take charge of every pixel on the screen, and everything should matter when you're giving a talk. Everything should point towards something. And so so that made me think a lot, and then I stopped using it. But I thought, like, I like the idea of having this, I don't know, maybe brand, if you want to say, of Amidon Planet. I kind of like that. So I was trying to think, like, well, what was it? And I also saw a talk by a guy who was graduating at the time who kind of had this, what he would say, like, brand to his stuff that he put out there, so to kind of get like a consistent message behind what he was doing. So what I did is I did some hard thinking and decided that I would redo the image, but have it mean something. So now if you go to my website, Twitter feed, Instagram handle, and now this podcast, all falls under the name Amidon Planet. And so when I give a talk somewhere, so I talk at a lot of conferences and do some professional development stuff, and when I do that, I make sure that I have a post on my website that then corresponds with the talk, so that if someone comes up, they used to would come up and say, hey, I really like your slides. Well, because I took the how to make PowerPoints that don't suck slides, how to make PowerPoints that don't suck course, that my slides look different, right? They look different than some people think that they want to have a copy of them. So they used to come up and ask me, hey, can you send me a copy of your slides? Well, the file is so huge that doesn't really work. So what I would do is put a copy on the website, and then if they wanted to see my slides, they have to go to the website. Just, hey, head to AmidonPlanet.com. It'll be the last post. And so when they go there, they also see I have other posts and other content out there. And maybe they can also, now they can see that I have a podcast, and they can see my Instagram feed. They can see all this stuff now. So it has a purpose, right? And even if you go into the image now, the image doesn't look anything like the Animal Planet image anymore. It's red and white, and has a picture of a Earth in it, or actually now it's Saturn. But if you look at the colors actually mean something. Like, so I graduated at the University of Wisconsin, and where the colors are cardinal and white. Well, those same colors that they use on the website are the same colors that I use in my logo. So everything has some sort of meaning, right? And so that's where it came from, Nick. So thank you for the question. And if you have a question out there and you want to get answered, you can respond to my Facebook posts. You can send me a direct message through Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. And it's all at Amidon Planet. So there you go. Now, on to this episode's featured book, The Power of Moments, Why Certain Experiences Have Extraordinary Impact by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. A little bit about the authors from their bios. Chip Heath is a professor at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, where he teaches courses on strategy and organizations. Dan Heath is a senior fellow at Duke University's Case Center, which supports entrepreneurs fighting for social good. That sounds excellent. So both of them have written four New York Times bestselling books, Made to Stick, Switch, Decisive, and this one, The Power of Moments. Their books have sold over 2 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 33 languages. That's amazing. Now, this book is organized into 4 sections. So you have an elevate section, an insight section, a pride section, and a connection sections, where they illustrate each of these chapters with great examples from all sorts of fields, many of them education related. And so these 4 things are also the ingredients of what make up a defining moment, which we'll talk about within the episode when I start talking with Gary. So at the end of each chapter, this is good, is a whirlwind review with kind of the Cliff Notes version of each chapter for those that are not good at taking notes. And then a scenario where they apply lessons from the chapter to a situation. It reminds me of Daniel Pink's book, When, which we featured in episode 1. When is a Why of this podcast. In that book, as well as this one, the author, or in this case the authors, did a good job of highlighting the points they are making and applying them to situations that readers can relate. I really enjoyed that, excuse me. So also, Heath and Heath do a really good job in the notes section. I wouldn't normally look at the notes, but I looked at these, and it's just really illustrative. And I mean, they even said, like, hey, we thought we were pretty remarkable by putting this kind of insight into the book, but then we Googled and we found it was, 9 years ago. It was a pretty prominent point. So anyway, the notes are pretty good. Overall, there's just a great job with the book. It's very readable, and I highly recommend it, obviously. So, and that goes into this final thing, before we jump into a conversation with Gary, is just a quick disclaimer. In no way will my conversation with Gary or our conversation together be able to communicate the whole value of the book. And even if we did, it would be from our perspective. In other words, if you like what you hear, go get the book for yourself. Links to purchase the book can be found at AmidonPlanet.com/episode 5, or seek it out wherever you buy high-quality books like this one. If possible, try to support your local bookstore. like Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi, which is where I actually purchased The Power of Moments. And speaking of Square Books, quick shout out to Dr. Steve Monroe for supporting my next book purchase at Square Books. Any recommendations out there on what to buy? Again, we're always looking for recommendations on books to cover in this podcast. So if you have one, again, head to the Facebook, respond to a post, and give us some recommendations for some books out there you think would be good for us to cover. All right, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with Dr. Gary Williams from Wittenberg University on The Power of Moments by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. Okay, we are back with Dr. Gary Williams of Wittenberg University. He has agreed to come back on the show another time to the Amidon Planet podcast to talk about a book, The Power of Moments. I mentioned it at the last episode that I was going to cover this book next, and he was like, hey, that's a great book. I've read it. I'd be willing to join you on it. And I'm like, let's do it. Let's do it again. So yeah, Gary, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, Joel, it's great to be back on, and I think that this is going to be a really cool episode. This is The Power Moments is a really great book by Heath and Heath, and I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, they have a number of books. This is the first one that I've read. I'm excited about some of the other ones, Switch and Made to Stick.
Both are really good, actually. They're good leadership. They have great leadership implications to them. So.
And they're brothers, right? Are they brothers?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Hopefully they're listening, and then maybe they can find out how cool we are with how cool they are, and this is just going to be a great match.
I hope so. Or I hope that they don't come back and say how wrong we are about our interpretation. But
it's very possible that might be the other side. So let's try to do that.
Yeah. Thanks for going on the positive side of that coin. So I appreciate it, Gary. So I thought for this conversation, given that, last conversation, we really leaned on your expertise in mentorship and some of the insights you had, which was an awesome discussion, lots of good feedback, either online and face-to-face that I've had with regards to that content. And also gave me a chance. I followed up with your challenge, and I texted a few people that had been a mentor to me, Rico Gutstein, who was big in my doctoral research and why I kind of continued with my doctoral studies when I was kind of bogged down. Anita Wager, who's my dissertation chair and my constant cheerleader. She's just always been in my corner. I gave her a text. And my cooperating teacher, Joe Dye, I sent him a text message as well. And so I just want you to know I did my homework. I don't know if you had a chance to do any homework. I'm putting you on the spot now. Well, you're always doing this work, so.
Yeah, I think every week I am trying diligently to reach out to different people in my sphere of influence. And ironically, in some ways, I'm also trying to shrink that sphere a little bit because I just think that we can get overextended. But in the last week, we had an actual really tough moment happen. A former student athlete of mine from Carthage passed away in a car accident, and it was pretty traumatic. I mean, he had overcome a lot of adversity in his life. In fact, he was a recovering alcohol and drug addict, and really started turning his life around. Was really getting involved in the Chicagoland area with many different groups and organizations about talking, and became a personal trainer to many people. And so it was pretty tough to watch from afar. But I was really proud of all of my former athletes, because I was watching them from afar express how much they loved and cared for him, and that just really made me feel good, because those were all the things that we were preaching to our students back then, that you really need to love the people that were around you. And so it was really while it was a very tragic moment, it was really reassuring to see so many people come together and be so thankful for his life and his influence.
Wow. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's a tragic moment, but an opportunity to see the fruits of your mentorship, I guess, and putting into them and seeing how they are responding in those moments. And I mean, you can't say, hey, you need to do this and you need to react in this way, but the fact that they actually just did react in the way shows that the time and wisdom that you placed within them came out in the most important and tragic time. So
so it was one of those little victories of the little, we always talk about the emotional fuel that we need to get through our day and our work, especially when we're in this avocation of education. And you happen to be coming from a teaching side. I'm coming from a athletic and coaching side. But in either case, we're both educators who are really trying to figure out a way to, well, actually, as Heath and Heath would say, we're trying to be mentors who are doing two things, which is create high standards for those that are under our care, but also provide them lots of assurance. And sometimes they don't feel that assurance when the high standard is really, on top of them. But I was really, inspired by that, by what happened last week. But also then I was reflecting back on this book, and I know that one of the things that I think we're going to get into is the actual connection between this book and last week's conversation. There's a whole chapter in here about mentoring.
Yeah.
And this notion, I think, if we as we examine this, I think it's really cool to see the connections that are being built and why mentoring is important, not just in an educational world, but also in some ways, this is also a business book that's talking to companies about how they're gonna create these awesome experiences. And again, it comes back to the one-on-one connections between a mentor and mentees and people that influence your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's get into this. Again, The Power of Moments. The title of the book is The Power of Moments: Why Certain Experiences Have Extraordinary Impact, by Chip and Dan Heath and Heath. And so we kind of came up with some categories. Well, we did. We came up with some categories that we're going to go through and see where this conversation goes. So we're going to start first with our high five. So high five is 5 kind of key learnings. This is kind of reflective of what I've done in previous episodes of the podcast, but thinking about what are some learnings that we can extract from this book. Well, first, actually, before we do that, I just wanted to make sure that we had a common understanding about what they're talking about with a moment. They're talking about this idea of a defining moment. So what they say is a short experience that is both memorable and meaningful, and it can be created from one or more of the following 4 elements, which they go deeply into, where it's elevation, insight, pride, and connection. And so, when they're thinking about those 4 things with regards to is like kind of the ingredients, not all of them need to be present to be a defining moment, but those are the kind of the key indicators. So going from there, Gary, I'm going to give it to you. What do you think? What was something that popped out to you as a key learning?
Well, I think I just talked about it. And so I think one of the key elements within there is the role that mentors play in terms of how to help create these moments and sparks for the people that are under their care. So as you look at a couple things that really struck out to me, one of the first things was in the moments of elevation, this notion of how leaders are destined or required, or not necessarily required. Let's skip that part. How leaders are really there to help fill pits and then build peaks in people. That's on page 54 of the book, and I think it's a great part really early on where you get this sense that these moments can either be super powerful or super detracting from the path that you're going on in your life. And what is the obligation of those of us that are with the people that are underneath our care? And this really challenges us that we should be thinking in a mentoring style that our job is to fill those pits that are happening in people's lives and then build these peaks and help them get up on this trajectory. Well, in the same token, I think there were 2 other things within mentoring that I think were really critical. And the first was in the text right around 123, 124, when they talk a little bit about this idea of stretching for insight. And I really, really got really connected to this piece. There were 2 pieces that really connected to me. This one, stretching for insight, and then also the idea and concept right around 188 about practicing courage. Those are the 2 real big pillars for me in terms of what I drew from the text. the stretching for insight in the parts that really got me connected was this whole idea of stretching yourself and stretching people to seek self-insight or self-exploration. That, Heath and Heath say to stretch is to place ourselves in situations that expose us to the risk of failure. I think so many of us are risk averse because of our desire to avoid failing. That real uncomfortability of stretching really leads us to seeking truth. And I think in the end, that is where, for us, we have to, as the text would say, we have to break the script. We can't get caught up in this wheel where we're just constantly repeating the same things to ourselves day in and day out. But we really got to stretch and break ourselves so that we can then search for that meaning that's out there.
All right. Gary, I think you gave me like 7 learnings all in one big sense there. So let's break it down a little bit. So I would say, I'm trying to like synthesize a little bit. So you're talking about the role of mentors playing, like that role, the mentors have a role in defining these moments, like just the fact that they have some power or some agency in doing that. Would you say that? And then you actually touched on one that I touched on, and maybe we're just doing different grain sizes, so that's okay. We're sorting it out. So that a pit can be flipped to peaks, just that insight, that this pit, talking about Joe Dye, he got me thinking about that way back when he said he never gave a math test. It was always a written celebration of learning. And so, I mean, he did a little bit to try to fill in that pit where, it's a math test day. Some people would rather have a root canal than have a math test. But the fact that you can take that pit and say, I'm just going to even just change the name of it, and it might fill in that pit a little bit. Or, even in other cases where I think that my celebrations of learning here at Ole Miss, I think truly are celebrating like, let's identify what we have learned and then let's celebrate it. Can ask my students, maybe they have a different opinion, but I think that at least at a minimum, I think that the pit got filled and it's like something not to be scared of. But the fact that there's lots of people that are scared of assessments, and that you're not just filling the pit for your own course, but you're filling in the pit like a history of pits, that they're bringing into that context. But I like what you're saying there. I mean, even the example that they're talking about with the stretch for insight, the kind of the little story that they talked about the executive that didn't have experience with diesel engines. She had a lot with regards to processes, and so there was this pit, like she didn't have this knowledge, and how would she be seen as someone who could help with processes if she didn't know about, like, what do you do with engines? But she went out and did field visits, and that turned into a peak. Like, everyone's like, wow, look at, like, she's trying to learn. She's trying, like, and now this seemingly deficit now becomes an asset that they can use to better the company, better her leadership. And it's just, it became this need for insight became this now something that can be used to guide her leadership going forward.
Yeah, so when they talk about these pits and peaks, and I think one of the really key learning things I took from just the whole text was the intentionality that leaders have to be able to influence these moments in people's lives. And then on the flip side, the need for us as individuals to also practice going through these moments in our lives. And so 188 has this really cool analogy, which is exactly what I believe in terms of everything I've ever taught anyone for leadership. The quote was, just as an athlete practices his or her moves to commit them to muscle memory, we must do the same with our values. And that's when I teach leadership, I always tell them, like, listen, leadership is learned, it's cognitive, it isn't about position, it's about opportunity. And this text really brings that to light, where, these moments, the aha learning moments that many of us only do in retrospect, right? So when you have an aha or learning moment and you're like, oh, that's what that was, this book really challenges you to seek those out. Or if you're in a mentoring relationship or in a supervisory or leadership arrangement, to actually encourage those or actually create those memories.
Yeah. And that was one of my lies, that these moments can be designed. And in this case, like the one example you put out, I've had that all underlined, is they can be practiced. Oh, that's real quick side note. Do you write in your books?
I do. If you want to see some of my writing.
Yeah, I'm all scribbly.
Highlighting and writing.
Scribbly dibbly. Yeah.
Scribbly, all kinds of stuff in
awesome.
here. In fact, I wrote a couple things about like, in fact, one of them is, boy, I screwed that one up because it's really kind of like an interesting, especially when it came to some of the things in here. I'm like, oh boy, I'm not very good at that.
Oh,
right
good.
Now.
That's one of our categories coming up. That's awesome.
It is one of our categories. So it's ironic you asked me about that. So I was like, oh.
But I mean, that goes into like this, especially with teaching, right? A lot of times when you look at lesson plans, it's like, I'm going to have a whole class discussion. Well, what is it going to look like? Like, how are you gonna tie it up with the objectives? How are you gonna take advantage of what the students have given you in their own like small group discussions and bring it in, like to practice, to make sure that this whole class discussion is not just you like saying the Ferris Bueller's Day Off lecture where it's like anyone
yeah. I heard someone speak this last week at a conference, and the quote that was given was, we are one moment or one person away from completely altering our lives. And we can either do that by choice or by chance. Mm-hmm. And to me, this text reminds us that we have the opportunity to choose to do and to be the moment or to be the person that could forever change the trajectory of someone's life, or to be there when the trajectory changes, and to help them, as Heath and Heath say, fill that pit so that they can then build to a peak.
Okay, so that's perfect, because I used to think about not wasting any time. Like, you only have so much time, and I like to think that there's a lot of teachers listening to this, maybe because I assign it as required listening. No, I can't do that. No.
It's always a good thing for the podcast likes and all kinds of good stuff.
That's right.
So keep doing it.
No, just with regards to teachers, like thinking about the classroom, like that last few minutes where, okay, we wrapped up, we can't really dive into something else. How can I think about designing that moment at the end of a class to really take advantage of, to not lose it, like that, to not underestimate the power of a moment, and to think about what are some ways that I could use that end of class period. I mean, one of them that came to mind was, and I don't know how this would fall in line with the elements that Heath and Heath talk about, but it was a student who struggled, who repeated the course, who had an opportunity to repeat, to spend some more time with me, which is fantastic. Beautiful. Maybe not for his schedule, but it was good for mine. But then, he just needed some extra motivation, and he was a really good guitar player. And I had a guitar like hanging in my classroom as a just something I had. And, I'd say, hey, if you do a good job through the week, you're passing, you can play a song on Friday at the end of the day. And it was like, okay, he's motivated. And he would just, like, at the end of the class, he'd be like, what do you want me to play on Friday? I'm like, how you doing on your, I'm passing. What do you want me to play? I'm like, I want you to surprise me. And so Friday became this, like, whoa, like this concert, really. I mean, it was a 2-minute thing where everyone's ready. It's Friday. We're ready to get out of school. And, he would put on this little show. And it's 2 minutes, right? That could be thrown away of kids standing by the door with their backpacks, just, talking about how lame my math lesson was. But, and I didn't, that was just kind of desperate, drawing at straws, trying to get at something to motivate this kid. But I'm wondering if, as teachers that are way more creative than I, like, how do they design moments to use those things at the beginning and end of a period when you're not, might not be as most organized, but how do you, like, jump into things, or how do you end things well in designing those moments?
Well, they talk in the text about moments of pride, right? And so they talk about not only recognizing others, but also multiplying milestones, which was one of those things that I really took away from this text as I am not doing a good job of, because, you know, the idea and concepts that they speak about in here is in order to, you know, we're trying to elevate people, right? So, and part of elevation is breaking the script, as the text would say. So you broke the script. The traditional math classroom is not going to have a guitar being played in there. And then when you did was you provided this insight, right? And that's another piece of this, right? And you stretched him. He's repeating the class. You're trying to stretch where he's at, but more importantly, you're providing him a high standard, saying you must do this, but you're giving him reassurance that says, if you do this, I'm going to let you do something that you love to do. And that invoked pride in this person, right? Because then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, he gets to have this really special moment with his class, and he sees that connection between, I just got pushed, there's a high standard, Mr. Amadon, Joel's got a high standard here, he's giving me assurance, and then I feel this pride, and then now a connection is made. And those are all the steps that they talk about. You got to elevate people. You have to provide them insight. You fill them with pride, and then you spark this connection. And these are those moments that he probably won't forget for the rest of his life. And so we miss those opportunities all the time, whether it's simply just the other day I went around the department here, the athletic department, on a Friday afternoon, and I literally took a bag of candy and just went to every single person I could find between 3 and 3:45 and just handed a piece of candy out. And I just said, hey, thanks for everything this week. And it may have been corny, maybe it's, people could look at me and be like, you're a college athletic director and what are you doing? But I mean, people were like, it sparked conversation. So in giving a moment of pride to somebody, it provided this opportunity for a connection. And then next thing you know, it's sparking something, and they're taking that moment and creating something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that idea of multiplying milestones. I mean, I think that's probably what shuts down. That idea could avoid people shutting down their dreams, right? Like, not just I'm gonna create a podcast. Maybe it's I'm going to listen to 5 podcasts. I'm going to figure out what equipment I need. Like these milestones that I get to a place, and then I can invite someone for their first conversation, so we can see if we can do this with 2 people, like that sort of thing, or whatever it is. My son Noah, who's sitting in the room here with me, he ran a half marathon this year as a 13-year-old. It's amazing. But, it doesn't just start with run a half marathon. It's like, can you run a mile without stopping?
Right.
Can you run a 5K? Can you, and eventually ends it where he's able to do that. It's, so proud of him. But we figured out what are these milestones that he needed to have in place in order to achieve that kind of loftier goal. Right?
Well, and that's precisely one of the areas that I know, as in my role in athletics as an educator, that I have got to get redirected. We so focus on these large outcome-based goals, and
win the championship every year.
You got to win the championship. You got to win the scoreboard matter. All these things, right? And you got to raise a certain amount of money. You got to have a certain amount of success. And what we forget is, and it's something I instituted when I got here a couple years ago, was we do mid-season evaluations. I was so frustrated with all of these of the lack of care that we would put into end-of-season evaluations, same as teaching evaluations, right? I mean, like, how many times does a person really read them when they're at the end? They're either kind of taking a pot shot at the end, they don't fill them out because they're tired, And so we instituted what are we at the mid-season point? Like, what's the temperature and climate of the people? And boy, I mean, that you want to talk about stretching for insight. Like, that can elicit some really tough truth at a tough period of time. But I think if we all better thought of our years in smaller chunks, that we give ourselves permission to say, okay, after this first 3 weeks, where are we at? Do I need to redirect the milestone? Do I need to push the milestone? Do I need to keep on the path that we're on. We are so worried about a big chunk and a big outcome that we forget that if we just broke it up into these smaller chunks, we might actually elicit better moments. Because there are times where we, in our mind as teachers and educators, think, boy, this is where they need to be at this point. Well, if they're not there, well, whose fault is that?
Right.
I mean, we can blame them, or we have to also take some responsibility for that. And maybe I'm saying something that's, going to really elicit some reaction out of people, but it's my firm belief that it's too late to wait to the end of something to figure out where you screwed it up. In the middle of that, they talk about this whole idea of connection and this whole idea of deepening ties and creating shared meaning. Well, you do that by actually having a vulnerable conversation with your class or your team or your staff, like I have, and say, boy, it's October. I thought we were going to be somewhere. We're not there. So here's where we need to let's talk. What happened? What kept us from being here? And then in turn, well, where should we go from here? And inviting more people to have that meaningful dialogue, I think, is really critical.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and again, anytime where you have people interacting with each other, it's like sweet tart. You can have some sweet and you can have some sour, and like there's ways that you can you can work within those relationships, and kind of leads into that connection thing. That you can. What are some things that we can do to intentionally mend some fences or whatever we need to do? And I think also with me, like, why, if I see a student going off the rails, there's things in the middle that we could do. Like, we talk about midterm grades or whatever. But even just knowing that we have electronic grade books, and most people do now too, that you can see like, wow, this person is going off. And so like identifying what are some milestones that I want for my students. Like I want them to be in attendance a certain amount. I want them to have a certain I have an assignment that's just basically kind of you're doing it. It's mostly just, it's an effort sort of assignment. And I want that assignment to be at a certain level. And if either of those two things, attendance or that effort level assignment, falls down a certain level, we're having a conversation immediately. Mm-hmm. Like it's not a mid-season evaluation. It's I'm checking, I got a dashboard, I'm checking it. If anyone's in the red, we're having a conversation so that we can do something about it, rather than, oh, wow, you got this grade at the end that you weren't expecting that. I'm sorry. But having that conversation in the middle, like, hey, what's your goal for this course? Your current performance is not leading you to that point, right? These are two things. What's going on? Mm-hmm. Is this the right, path for you, or what can we do to help you out? And sometimes that leads to some really good conversations where they're sharing some struggles that they're having, and we can remedy them. And if we don't do it, we just think, oh, they're a student, they don't care, or they're, after that, they're being selfish on the field. Like that's not always the case. There's usually a reason. People want to perform, and so like, how can we help them get at those reasons?
It can be very overwhelming to think about having to take a team or a class or a staff from point A to point B, and thinking about that destination and all the things that could happen. And where this book really resonated with me was in terms of these milestones, was this whole notion of multiple finish lines, and getting people to understand that there are multiple benchmarks that we need to have that will help spark either dissonance or stretching to seek self-improvement, or encourage courage, which then can help them break this script that is the typical student, teacher, player, coach relationship, boss, supervisor relationship. And it's in those moments that are going to create these sparks that we hope are going to ignite a peak, but it may also ignite the desire to fill the pit, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where I really think we need to challenge teachers and coaches that are listening to this, or people in business, leaders, that we too often expect them to come to us. We have more information than we have, way more knowledge and information about the situation, about what's going on. We need to be more intentional and then gather more information so that we can see where that connection and that disconnect is. And people say, well, that takes time. Okay, well, if you want to be a good team a good leader, then just keep doing the same things over and over again. You want to be great, you want to be in a great organization. That's what these books talk about. Like this book, along with many others, talk about how do you go from good to, I mean, there's literally the text good to great,
Good to great.
but how do you go from good to great? Well, you have to do something different and special. And that's where this text is really challenging us to say, like, we know that life is, going to have its ups and downs. How do we create more ups than downs? And how do we make the downs not so down and the ups keep multiplying?
Yeah. So like, I guess what you're saying too is you having information and experience can help a coach develop what are some healthy milestones given the current position of their program. I could think about what are some healthy milestones for students that I'm having in their development as a teacher given their current level and where they want to be, and thinking about that with our information and knowing that, at least in the red flag scenario that I gave before, where a kid thinks, oh, I'm doing okay, I missed a couple assignments, I missed a few classes, and they don't see a red flag being waved. Meanwhile, I see red flags and fire coming out of the
Right.
ship, like, hey, okay, I can help you in this scenario. But the milestones thing got me thinking, and especially they talked about exposure therapy as well, about that other book that we were reading together, the 12 Rules book, and Jordan Peterson and his talking about like the importance of knowing that if by breaking things down, you can make better the world around you in just like little itty bitty increments, right? It might just start with cleaning the desk. It might start with little things like that, and knowing that it doesn't have to be overwhelming. I think some of the things in this book, sound like these huge things to overtake or to design, these huge moments to design, but they don't have to be. And they make that point later in the book. They're talking about these could be very, small things to start in order to get you to that desired outcome.
One of the first things that text talks about, Heath and Heath say, and it's back on page 54 and 55, is this whole notion of the service industry and how they're always playing defense and never offense.
Yeah.
And I mean, you want to talk about, hitting it on the head, and then, and they mentioned, a company, Magic Castle leaders play offense, but they don't try to make everything perfect. And this is the statement that really resonated with me, but they nail the moments that stay with you.
Right.
And that's what makes an exceptional educator exceptional, is you're not going to be perfect, but when that moment is about to happen, you strike. And you know that this is a critical moment. And I so often have, in my opinion, as a leader in higher education, have failed in playing too much defense. Like I'm constantly always putting out a fire or worried about having to figure out something. And it's like I so badly have really challenged myself to think this summer, as I'm going into next school year, how can I play more offense? Like, this is who we are. And how you do that is you define better moments by being more courageous. Like, and you just say, like, this is who we are. And we need to get through the high pressureness of life. It talks in there about how high pressure for results leads to urgency to get things done, which leads to bias, which leads to a lack of accountability and all of these negative moments. And we all need to find a way. We owe it to the people that we are serving as leaders to slow and simplify things down, and to try to make sure that, so whether it's a department chair in an educational setting, whether it's a head coach for the assistant coaches and the players, whether it's an AD for all of the people underneath their care, all the head coaches, it's our job to get things simplified and to think about how do we play offense and not constantly play defense.
Yeah. I think, and I guess maybe part of that courage, that you talk about, is putting trust in those in your organization. If you have, and this kind of goes to my last learning of designing moments that instill this shared purpose, and we have this shared purpose, and then having the courage to say to those that you are leading or those within your classroom to say, like, this is what we do, this is what we're, this is our, area of influence, go and operate under this purpose. And just knowing that there's so much power in the purpose, right? And that having courage, knowing that, they might make mistakes, but if it's towards that purpose, like, you can probably make small corrections to them, but that knowing that they're going to be inspired to keep moving towards that thing that everyone's sharing.
Yeah. And another thing, Joel, that what this reminds me of is, I sat through our conference meetings yesterday all day, and the first meeting went a little long, and then everyone was kind of like, fair to say cranky because it went longer, and then we cut into lunch, but then we saw an opportunity to start the next meeting earlier, and then as soon as it was over, we wanted it to be done as fast as possible. And we were then scheduled for a dinner at like 5:30, and the meeting ended at like 2:30. It was scheduled to go to 4 or 4:30, and all I could think to myself was, what a missed moment. Like, never again for another 6 months or 3 months, probably almost 6 months, will I see my colleagues who are all athletic directors across the conference together at any one time. And almost shame on us for missing the moment, for allowing the need to want to be done with a meeting, to check boxes, to say, oh, we did all the conversations. It's like, yes, we're so busy. Yes, it's the end of the year. Yes, it's tired. But all I could think to myself is, boy, we really should have used this moment, taken advantage of this opportunity to actually talk about real things instead of just business things, and make decisions about policies and procedures. And for me, I was so frustrated walking away from that meeting because all I could think to myself is, like, there's some really smart people in this room. There's some really gifted and talented leaders, and I missed a chance to actually hear from them about how they do things. And I don't even know who to blame, because, like, in some ways we should just I'm just going to blame myself, because that's part of what this book talks about in terms of not blaming others, but pulling accountability. But I'm looking to leadership within an organization too, to be able to say, okay, we have an extra hour, let's talk about this, or let's have a discussion about this. But we get too caught up and it's partly because I don't think we realize the opportunity that we have in front of us, and we take things for granted. And this book has reminded me, even if you look at the cover, it says why certain experiences have extraordinary impact. Like, that's something we can create, but we take it so much for granted. And as educators and teachers, we think, oh, it's another school year, so here we go. We got to do the same lesson, same first syllabus day, same this, then it, the books is so awesome about, like, let's break the script. Like, let's figure out how to raise the stakes and try to do something different. What do we have to lose? Right. Because ultimately we know we're going to get from point A to point B, but will we get from A to better? That's the catch, right? That's the key.
Yeah. And so not taking advantage of that moment and maybe that frustration with your meeting, like, that was with my last learning was, like, and I didn't have a better way to phrase it, but not using groups is selfish. Like, I can create opportunities where, it's just me in front of a classroom where everyone is going to face me. And, I'm in charge of, basically facilitating like 30 relationships that if their relationship with me is like lacks trust, like, boom, that whole class is shot, right? Versus if I create opportunities for them to connect together, right? If I create opportunities for them to build relationships within small groups and things like that, I have a better chance for a defining moment to occur, right? Otherwise, it's all dependent on me. It's all dependent on my relationship. And I don't know how your meeting was structured, if it was one person's in charge and everyone needs to talk kind of through them or at their permission. Like, maybe there's a real problem within the conference that, or a dynamite solution to something that has already been solved at some place, and just if they would have the opportunity for someone to recognize it and then that someone else to bring it to someone's attention, and all of a sudden we have all of this insight in the room where before, if it didn't go through the grand pumbaa, like it's not going to happen, right? And that's, you see that a lot of cases in classrooms where only there's one person in charge, and there's always a person in charge, but the person in charge, and are they allowing the interactions to happen where great things can occur, right? Mm-hmm. Is that happening or not? So
yeah, so as a part of this conference meetings the day before, we made a decision to bring every single staff member from every single institution in our conference. There was over 250, almost 250 people that came together and were talking about mental health issues in our conference and with our student athletes and with each other. And for the first time, it was like marvelous. And now it's, Heath and Heath talk about on page 213, creating these shared meetings. When we're going to bring all these people together, we need to make sure the moment matters, right? And that's the synchronization of moments, as the text would talk about. We think it's too expensive, too complicated. It really wasn't complicated. It wasn't that expensive. People got buses. They brought people in. We had some speakers, and at the end of the day, we owe it to ourselves that if we're going to do this, then we need to make it meaningful. And I always talk about this with our coaches when we talk about, are we going to bring a guest speaker in? Are we going to? If you're going to spend the resources on a shared moment, then you've got to make sure it's impactful, right? Or else you've wasted one of the most precious resources, not alone money, but time.
Right.
And once you erode time, you erode their satisfaction. Then the next time you bring someone in, they're going to be like, this is no good. They're going to automatically come into that shared experience, with a negative connotation. And so, this is, they talk in the text about this whole notion of noticing how many peak moments are shared between weddings and baptisms. But we also need to think about the notion that we crave personal contact, even if it's with strangers, that knowing that something matters and it's real. And when I think about this, I often think in terms of shared moments that too often a teacher or a coach isolates themselves to their classroom and doesn't bring other people in to share moments with their class, whether it's an assistant principal, whether it's a different teacher, whether it's as a coach, different administrators. It's almost like we want to control the moments for our people. The more people that share in the moment, the more people buy in then to what your organization is doing. And trust me, when the pits happen, there's going to be better opportunity to create a peak out of that.
Yeah.
But when we isolate ourselves, then and kind of like create this little area that this is just mine.
Yeah.
Well, then you don't share the good moments, and if the only moments you share with people are negative moments, it's going to get old fast.
Yeah.
And someone like me, who's only gets hit with the negative things of your program, I never get to share in the locker room talks or a travel. All the little things that build up to great moments. If all I'm getting is the negative moments, well, then I have a different view of your organization than you probably do, or even that you think is actually happening. And so I so often and so badly always try to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm trying to share it with others. So whether for me, it's a president and a senior team, like I want them to come and experience the normal day-to-day moments that are cool, so that when I do come to them with a problem, there's like some investment and buy-in.
Yeah. Well, that's and that was one of the more powerful things with regards to the home visits, right? Like obviously that was from a school perspective. Like when Heath and Heath talk about this, these designed home visits where teachers don't bring any paper, and it's just, we're going to have a moment here where you're going to make a connection with your kid's teacher. And that is a seriously designed moment where the questions are scripted, but it's not, they're not carrying a script. And like how they increase the parent involvement in school. The parent teacher night was more well attended than any of them that I've ever heard about. I mean, just knowing that the value of the connections that are made, and then now again coming back to this idea of shared purpose, what can be accomplished? It's unreal. Like once you get behind a purpose, like it's amazing what can be done.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, let's keep moving on. That was a long time on our high five, but that was good. There's a lot. Again, great book. There's lots in it, and encourage people to go get it for themselves. So next category, the more you know. So now that you know better, Gary, after reading this book, what would you have done differently in some situation in your past? There you go. This should be a good one.
So I think I go back to the whole idea of what my real purpose is in terms of the elevation that I should be providing the people that I work with, and really understanding the desire to play offense, not defense, and to fill pits and build peaks for people. That too often I get focused on actually identifying the pits that I forget to figure out how to actually build peaks. And that comes from playing defense. That comes from being reactive. That comes from really not being in shared moments with people and only seeing sound bites of their work. And then, you're called in, you get a parent call, or you get a call from another person on campus that says so-and-so's having a problem or doing the wrong thing. And so then the only time the person sees you is identifying the pit that they probably already feel like they're in. And so I think I need to work a lot harder, especially on a one-on-one level with the people that I lead, of making sure that I'm acknowledging pits, but also what can I do to fill the pit and help fill the pit, and then how can we build to the next peak?
Yeah, I was going to go in the same direction. So I think, I talked before about the whole idea of a written learning celebration and thinking about the, having exams or tests or whatever, and trying to fill that pit and try to make it into a peak. I think I've done a decent job of filling the pit, but I really haven't made it into a peak. Because really, when you do come to the end of for example, the end of a semester, right? Final exams, it's never a more stressful time for a student, especially some of these education students that I deal with. Like they're in a lot of different courses. Sometimes they're in content areas, sometimes they're doing, lots of projects in their education courses. And so how do we build a peak? And really thinking about what are the outcomes that I want. And that brought me to the quality, there's the Course Design Institute, right? And thinking about, what are those end objectives that I want? Like I want my students to be, professionals who are sharing the knowledge that they have gained with others, and so that we can all get better in this profession that we love, right? And so how do we see that in the final celebration, that we are doing the things that I want them to do as they go out into the field? And so I think, again, like I said before, I think I've done a decent job of filling a pit, but I want to build a higher peak, or build a peak. So that's where I would go. So we're kind of in agreement there.
Yeah. I think the other one for me is the realization of my missteps in terms of goal setting and really not being more intentional with the staff about setting small milestones. We do something that's really unique in athletics, but every 3 weeks I ask the coaches to rate their athletes for their affinity for the university. Retention is a huge issue on all college campuses, but in small private colleges even more so. And I ask them, every 3 weeks, I want you to check in with your athletes and tell me, grade them on how strongly you feel they're connecting to your team and to the university. And what I think I need to do is better connect that exercise to their actual milestones and goals, right? So that every 3 weeks, I'm asking them to say, how are you progressing along in terms of your goal of winning the conference championship, your goal of having a GPA at a certain place, your goal of recruiting a certain number of people, and really set up very intentional, hey, let's sit down, and even if it's electronic, which isn't the text would tell you electronic communication isn't always the best for this, but sometimes out of necessity, you need to make some of these moments happen where you're just saying, I want you just to pause for a second and tell me where you're at. Where are things going at this moment in time with these areas? And I think it's the old adage of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And it sounds so corny but it's true. Like, we need to find a way to say, man, the last 3 weeks, this is how things went. Here's what's coming up the next 3 weeks. And this is maybe where I need to course redirect, or I need to stay firm with where we're at, or boy, I need to abandon ship right now and we got to figure something else out. And too often we're too afraid to change, and it's only then in the aftermath that we sit down and say, boy, I wish I had, or I wish I had just done or listened to this, and too often I think, especially in our line of work, we don't take the feedback from our students fast enough. We don't take it seriously enough, and then it becomes nuclear. Like, they don't listen to me, they don't care about what I have to say, and it's like, and how do we create these leadership moments? And that's something that I'm really striving to try to figure out for next year as I'm going into our school year is, how do we slow things down, simplify them, and really think about what milestones we really want to accomplish in smaller windows.
Yeah. Because then when you make it's like if you go for that longer goal of not winning, winning the conference championship, and like there is a situation that happens, like, oh, all of a sudden, like, a conference championship is not in the cards for us, versus if there was a smaller milestone in between where we missed that, well, then that's just an adjustment to that. That other goal is still, the bigger goal is still out there. It's just we need to make a little adjustment. I think about the parallels with standards and objectives. So objective is a small, so teachers, we think about objectives that you can do within a lesson, like students should be able to do this by the end of a lesson, and those are all towards some sort of standard that the student should be able to meet by the end of a school year. And you think about, like, okay, if we're not meeting this objective today, that doesn't mean that the standard's out the window. It just means we might have to adjust the objective tomorrow to compensate for whatever level of understanding of that objective that we had yesterday. And so on and so forth down the line, and that it just makes for smaller adjustments that's easier to take than, oh, well, now the big goal is out. I can't, it's too far out there. I can't even touch it. So
I think we all get focused on our content area so much. Like you teach math, a football coach coaches football, basketball coaches basketball, a history teacher teaches history. We focus so much on delivering content that we forget that the absorption of that content and its connection to their bigger life is going to mean much more to them in the long run than anything they ever learn on a grease board, either doing a formula or watching an X and an O block each other to score a touchdown, right? And so, somehow, when, it's clear that the text concentrates on, again, it's on the cover, which says there's power in moments and there are certain experiences that will have extraordinary impact. And we have to find ways to use our content as a vehicle to create these experiences and then have extraordinary impact.
Nice. All right, we need to keep moving along here, so I think that was a good one to end on that category. Let's go for, should we do the scenario or should we do the sum it up? I was thinking maybe to flip those.
Sure, we can flip those.
Awesome.
What scenario are you thinking
about? All right,
about?
so here's a scenario. So let's say I am a leader within a school, okay? And I'm in charge of helping reshape a department, right? Mm-hmm. Department's having some issues, and I want to provide some sort of vision and thinking about, okay, if this provide some vision and direction for a department to take up, right? So okay. They might be having some issues, but I need to give them some direction and then help them live out that direction. So almost give them a purpose and help them live out that purpose. how would you think? So this is like let's just say it's an elementary school, right? And maybe it's the math teachers within an elementary school.
Well, if we use the formula that kind of this text talks about, the first thing would be, is I'm thinking about, so we're trying to get this group to move to the next place, come together and move to the next place.
Right.
So then I have to view myself in terms of leadership like a mentor would, and I have to create some high standards, but I have to have assurances that are built into there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's part of the first thing is, and one of the things Heath talks about is this notion of the moments of insight that are necessary. And so sometimes telling people that we don't have a good culture is an important thing. We think we do. Of course, no one wants to admit we're not succeeding or we're not having a good experience. But if the reality is the culture is broken, then having them, as the text would say, trip over the truth and really get into this notion of stretching themselves to see that there are other possibilities. So sometimes it comes in the form of just sharing anecdotes or stories or videos or TED Talks with people that says, like, hey, listen, like, this is what other people are doing, and they are making it successful. And it's not because they have more resources. It's not because they're smarter than you. It's because they've just invested more sweat equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the infusion of physical resources and equity in an organization, but then there's just the sweat equity it takes to actually move a place from where it's at to get them to be better. And so I think the idea of the realization that the leader is a mentor to all of these people, that they have to create some sense of higher standards and accountability, but also give them assurances that if they fail, it's exactly what we're hoping for. Like, we're expecting this to be difficult. I'm expecting you to trip over. I'm expecting this not to be, because, Heath and Heath talk about, most people don't move because they're fearful. But on page 181, they say, courage is the resistance to fear, the mastery of fear, not the absence of fear. So it's going to be difficult. It's to get a group to break down their barriers and to come together is not easy. I mean, it's really difficult. It's been one of the things that I've been working with here for over 5 years, and I still am not sure we're completely over the hump yet. But it's constantly reinforcing some of the truths. It's creating standards, holding accountabilities, but then also not being afraid to fill the pit and provide them assurances.
Yeah, I guess it also too, it depends on, within this scenario, on like what is the level of problem, right? So that got me thinking, and it's one of the more provocative examples that they provide in the book, the sanitation example, the community-led total sanitation, where they're talking about going into communities where there might not be a common place to relieve yourself. Let's just put it that way. And so, I mean, they do this very systematic demonstration of, hey, where are people going to the bathroom in this community? And they, and by the end of this, and you got to get the book and read it. I just get the book and read it. But at the end, I mean, people are so disgusted by the reality that they're surrounded with that that's a defining moment where they come together with a purpose, like, no, we need to solve this problem today, now. And so to have, in some cases where, especially in a school where you're dealing with children, and to be like, there's kids in the balance here, right? And like in this sanitation example, lives are in the balance, your health is in the balance. But in this case, kids' futures are in the balance, where the impact of a third grader in their math abilities with fractions and adding and multiplication, like there's definite ripples throughout their academic career. And like, how do we get the power of that situation communicated within that group? I mean, maybe there is a sort of like a shocking moment like that where, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and whatever is getting in the way of us having this shared purpose, that needs to go away now. And it's one of those movie moments. But I think what this book helps you see is that those movie moments, like in, some of the sports movies where they all come together, like those aren't just in a script and in Hollywood, they could be designed. And that's one of the things that I love about this book is that you can think about how to design those moments and think about these elements that they've called for.
Yeah, on 127, when they're talking about this concept of stretching for insight, they talk about that there's a formula for mentorship that is you have these high standards plus assurance, but also you have to give them direction and support. And that's the key piece, right? Which is at some level you have to provide them opportunities. So say you're trying to influence this community and people are rejecting you. There are going to always be in an organization, no matter whether you like it or not, there's going to always be people who are just going to reject any change. There's going to be people, though, on the bell curve that are maybe sometimes it's for altruistic reasons because they really do care and they want to achieve. And sometimes it's just because you're the boss and they're still morally developed in a place where they want to please their boss and they'll do what they're told to do. So as we've got to remember as leaders that we need to then latch on to those that are looking to move and change and really invest direction and support to them so that then the others around them are going to see these others that are going to start accomplishing things. And then that's when the insight occurs, when you start using data and information saying this team did these things that we were talking about, or this classroom did these things that we were talking about, and look at the place it jumped from here to here. And knowing through all of this that the realization is that as a mentor or a leader, your job is to create productive stress. That's what we were supposed to do. That on page 121, they talk about our job as the leader is to create this productive stress in people, and that we're not here to be liked. We're not here to be pat on the back. We have a job to do, and that the job is to create productive stress. And maybe you're doing things. Somebody said something to me about this. I go back to the culture that we have here, and our staff went to this all staff day and with the conference, and somebody said to me, and she was like, I'm just shocked that of the amount of people that you had here, the amount of people outside of your department that you had here, and I'm shocked at the level of engagement that they had. And that was a prideful moment for me, because it's kind of like the parent that learns that when their child is away from them that they're really on good behavior, even though I feel like every day my staff is hating my guts and trying to find every way possible to not do what I'm asking them to do. The reality is, whether they did it by choice or out of developmentally they just did what the boss told them to do, that they impressed upon outsiders that something good is happening here. And to me, that moment it needs to be capitalized on, and it needs to change my mindset about the way I look at my staff. Like I've got to stop thinking about them where they were and realize that was a defining moment for our department. Somebody from the outside, multiple people said, I can't believe how many people you got here. I can't believe their level of engagement. And to me, like that's where you start to see, like, my gosh, we've got a peak. A peak is, I thought we were in the pit. And we actually have a peak going on here. And how do I keep building on this and keep empowering them? That's exactly the thing that your scenario talks about is, it's not easy, but you got to find the groups of people that are going to latch in. You make things fun, memorable for them, and you help them see the outcomes. And then the rest are going to look at them because they're just naturally, either risk averse, or B, they just don't trust until they see it for themselves.
Right.
And then once people start buying in and seeing the production that you're having, then you can bring others along. But telling them, I told you so, or why didn't you do this from the beginning, will only destroy anything you're trying to build. You've got to humble yourself as a mentor or a leader, and you've got to just pick them up whenever they choose to pick up, and get them going whenever they choose to get going.
Nice. That's excellent. All right. Final thing. So I called it Sum for Seven. I have a 7-year-old. So how would you, Gary Williams, sum up this book for a first grader? He's a pretty good first grader.
He is pretty good.
Yeah.
He's very talented.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this, and I thought about how challenging this was, because I'm like, how would I talk to a 7-year-old about this? And all I could think, the analogy that came into mind is, asking like, well, so why do you go on roller coasters, or why would you go on a roller coaster? And some people go on a roller coaster just because, right? I don't go on roller coasters because I don't like the way it makes me feel, right? And so, but some people go on a roller coaster and they'll go and they're still hated, but others go because it's really exciting to them. And one of the things that I was thinking about, if I was talking to a 7-year-old about this book, is that life is like a roller coaster. It's going to have peaks, and it's going to have pits, and it's going to have these transitions that are going to occur, that are going to build to either a peak or a pit. And that, why are you riding this roller coaster of life? I want you to ride it because not to be fearful of the drops or the dips, but to be excited about the drops and the dips. And that this book really is going to challenge us to create our own roller coaster of life. That, if we just created a straight street, it wouldn't be as much fun. It really wouldn't. And we wouldn't grow. And yeah, we get from point A to point B, but we really get inspired and jacked up. And so when the roller coaster dips, it's scary because it's going straight down, we have to realize that it's about to pick back up again. And in that picking up, there's anticipation, right? And to think about what those emotions and feelings are like when you're on a roller coaster, and think about how they translate to life. And, we need to create these experiences as a leader. We owe it to the people that we have, that we are going to be that one person or one moment that it could be away from them experiencing these greatest successes. And that the book challenges us to intentionally define those moments of excitement that are going to elevate people, challenge them to seek the truth, or as the text would talk about, is insight, fill them with so much pride that they're going to seek to do this for others, and are going to connect people in a powerful way, so that when you do start coming down and it feels scary on the roller coaster, you've got someone to hold their hand with. Like, who likes to go to roller coasters on by themselves?
Yeah.
Some people do, but like thinking about the person that's next to you, and we scream because we want to we feel this. It makes us feel better as we're going through these tough moments, but it makes us even better when we go through tough moments together. So I didn't do a good job. I don't know if you could understand it.
That was nice work. I like that a lot. I was going a little shorter.
Yeah, where were you going to go?
I went, so,
I'm a little bit more verbose, so you know me.
Words are hard for me sometimes, but a lot of times. But anyway, when we're talking, we could give stories about me trying to talk in front of leadership school for the first time.
We'll do that on another podcast.
Yeah. So thinking about mind your manners. I live in the South, so that's something we do down here. I was like, mind your moments, right?
Oh.
And so being aware, and I think a lot of the kids in schools now, they're even being brought into this idea of mindfulness and being present within the moment, right? Trying to be aware of their breathing, or trying to be aware of their body, and thinking about minding your moments, and thinking about where is, what is happening right now, right? And do I have an opportunity for connection? Could I learn from this moment? Could I, have some pride? In thinking about like capturing those moments more from a personal perspective, but thinking about now, if we can mind your moments, how can you mind others' moments, right?
Neat.
And so how can you create a moment with somebody, right? And so that was kind of the simple way that I was thinking about it.
Yeah. Roller coasters and mind your moments.
Mind your moments. I like it.
Riding
Awesome.
out that roller coaster.
Riding out that roller coaster. Well, Gary, this was awesome. This was about as good as I could imagine. I think I like the categories. I like the conversation. I like where it went. And so maybe, excuse me. I'm looking forward to doing this again. Maybe we just have to think about what the next book could be. So we'll come up with some ideas. And I know we got some posts on Facebook about maybe some areas of leadership that we can dive deeper in. I definitely could lend on your expertise. But if people have ideas for books or other things, again, we would like to keep hearing from you, and
That came from
we'll keep going.
from Brock or Brody, right? I mean, some B
Billy.
name. That,
yeah, I can't recall. So anyway, but yeah, looking forward to keep doing this as we have our opportunities. So at a minimum, I get another opportunity to talk with my friend Gary. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Gary.
And at a minimum, I get a chance to talk with my friend Joel, and hopefully through our conversations, we're helping people not only get from A to B, but A to better.
Ooh, I like it. Fantastic. All right, Gary, on that note, I'm going to sign off. See you, Gary.
Sounds good. Good night. Or have a good good night, good afternoon, whenever you're listening
where
to
are
the
we at?
podcast.
Whatever, yeah.
Thanks, Joel.
All right, thank you, Gary.
So thankful for Gary being willing to take the time and share his perspective on the book. I look forward to having more conversations with Gary, and like I said, it's an excuse to talk to a friend. So it's awesome. So thank you for the positive support and wanting him to continue to do this with me. I appreciate it. I think we have a good thing going here, and again, I look forward to more opportunities to talk with him. So on the next episode of the Amidon Planet podcast, we'll be featuring something around my upcoming trip to Haiti to work with the 410 Bridge and some of their partner communities and their schools in Haiti. One book that has influenced the work of the 410 Bridge is When Helping Hurts, How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor and Yourself by Steve Corbett and Brian Fickert. That's been an amazing book for me. I know how much I've learned a lot from that book on working with teachers, students, and schools, and in this case, communities. But so maybe we'll feature that book, or maybe we'll have an interview, or maybe both. I don't know. Subscribe to the podcast, and you will be one of the first to find out when that episode will drop 2 weeks from when this episode drops. So that is all for episode 5 of the Amidon Planet podcast. You can find show notes for this episode at amidonplanet.com/episode 5. If you want to continue this conversation and or support the podcast, please do one or all of the following. Subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or Google Play. You can also follow the podcast in Spotify. Share the podcast. That's a good thing to do. With anyone that you think, hey, they should hear this. Review the podcast through your preferred podcast provider. You can like the Amidon Planet Facebook page. You can subscribe to the Amidon Planet email list. You can do that on amidonplanet.com. There's a subscribe button a little bit down on the page. Finally, I have been asked how someone can financially support the Amidon Planet podcast. So I recently started a Patreon account where folks can support me once a month to help cover some of the financial expenses of the podcast. You can find a button in my Patreon page at the bottom of amidonplanet.com where it says Be a Patron. Finally, if you just wanted to engage with me via social media, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, all on the handle at Amidon Planet. I'll be looking for questions and comments related to the episode, but I'll also be looking for general questions, suggestions for books to review, or other content to feature on the Amidon Planet podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen to episode 5 of the Amidon Planet podcast. Special thanks to Gary Williams for the conversation, and special thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. Finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to be better, teach better, and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.